Hello, everyone. In today's astrology deep dive, we are going to go into the birth charts of the infamous Zelda Fitzgerald and Scott Fitzgerald. I have been on such a rabbit hole of this. So, I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and we just celebrated the 10th annual Zelda week at the Zelda Dearest Hotel, which was built to honor Zelda Fitzgerald, and this was the 10th anniversary of her death date, where she tragically died in a fire in a hospital here in the Asheville area, which the whole thing just incited me to want to dive deeper into their birth charts, learning of the letters and how much Scott Fitzgerald's writing is actually influenced, if not even taken from Zelda Fitzgerald, was already a very intriguing concept to me. But seeing how this translates to the stars and really seeing two people's life path that basked in creativity, but also held a lot of undertones of mental health struggles, addiction struggles, was also very fascinating to see via the interpretation of the stars. And after going into a lot of different deep dives this week in the inner writings of Zelda, the letters that were exchanged between them, and even just the takes that a lot of people had at this 10th annual celebration, all was just extremely insightful. I got to dance the weekend away, honoring the original flapper herself, but she was also so much more complex and deep than that. She was not a one avenue creative genius, but a full spectrum creative being, and you can so see that in the astrology. So we will start with Scott Fitzgerald, a few of the musings that I see in his chart. I'll do some musings on Zelda Fitzgerald's chart and then talk about their chart synastry together, and we'll go into that deep dive. So stay tuned. So let's go into the birth chart of Scott Fitzgerald first. So he is a Aquarius rising, a Libra sun, and a Taurus moon. So I already see that his path is meant to be unconventional, unique. Aquarius risings have a path of owning their uniqueness, and that's not always easy, to be kind of the oddball, the weirdo, doing things more unconventional than what society normally does. But there's a part of you that really appreciates that no one can box you in, and you have to own that energy. With all of the Libra energy in Scott Fitzgerald's chart, Libra stelliums always point out a love for Venetian things, beauty, art, writing, any creative expression is really needed to alchemize Libran energy. And it's just seeing the beauty for what it is. And I think he always saw Zelda as his muse. Libras love to just see and pause and notice the way the light's hitting something, notice who is shining. They know how to really flirt and appreciate beauty for what it is. And Zelda appreciated, I think, the romantic channel that came from Scott, that he was always going like, darling, you are my muse. Thank you for being who you are. That Libra flirting, I think, really, really worked. You can see that Scott has Leo in Jupiter, and Leo lands in his 7th house with him being an Aquarius rising. So his marriage is a big link to his fame. His partnerships bring in a lot of that fortune and abundance. He mentioned a lot that he could not have wrote anything without Zelda being that inspiration. He even took some of her writing to actually publish it out. So a lot of the way he was going to attract money, Jupiter is our fortune, it's our little luck charm, was not only going to be from Zelda, but also it was going to be from fame, because it's very linked to Leo. And because Leo is so strong in Zelda's chart, that really, really makes sense in how it played out energetically. He also has some sextiles between Jupiter and Mercury. So it shows his writing, the way he communicates, the way he puts words out there was going to be linked to his fame and the way he attracted money. And his writing is what he really pushed for, not only to help support Zelda's mental health stuff, her stays at hospitals, but to also give their family some support. I think some of the trouble spots I see in Scott Fitzgerald's chart is his South Node is actually in the house of marriage and relationships. So there is some karmic stuff between Scott and Zelda. He is meant to really find his own sense of self. And I think at times he really struggled with that. There ended up being a lot of drinking, and there was not a lot of support for alcoholics at this time in history. I see this fifth house stellium, which Zelda also has a fifth house stellium, different signs, but he has Pluto, Mars, and Neptune all landing in that fifth house. Neptune is often where we can find even addiction patterns. It holds that 12th house energy, that Piscean energy. Neptune can get us a little delusional. When it lands in the fifth house, that can either be a really good creative channel, but it can also be us over seeking pleasure and not knowing boundaries around pleasure. They were known for spending all their money to detriment even at times. And he also ended up way overdoing it on escapism lifestyle. The boundaries were not in place and he really ended up struggling. Pluto and Mars put really close together can provide a lot of conflict in the chart because Pluto already catalyzes such intense energy. And when it's right there with Mars, we can have a poor grip and control over our angers, our frustrations, our power and control patterns. And I think he really struggled with that a lot of the times too. They definitely had some pretty heated arguments at times. They baited each other a lot. There was definitely some toxicity that exists within that romance and pleasure. It had a lot of power play even behind it at times. To detriment, I could add Pluto in the fifth house. People tend to go a little dark in their pleasure. They like to control people or be controlled. It kind of ends up having that power play kink behind it. And you can definitely see that in how their relationship played out. I also think over pleasure seeking ended up taking a lot of his personal power away. That also being said, Pluto and Mars in the fifth house gives a lot of energy towards creative pursuits and fun and play. And that is kind of what led to a lot of their fame patterns too. So you can definitely see both channels playing out. A few other things that I note in Scott Fitzgerald's chart is we have a Chiron in Libra. That is the wound of relationships. So often you learn more about yourself through really challenging relationship dynamics than anything else. It pulls up all your triggers and wounds for you to work with, but it also means that there is very catalyzing energy behind your relationships. He also has Chiron in the 9th house, so a lot of it has to do with his belief systems and him really needing to know how to see both the bigger picture, the smaller picture, and figure out what he actually thinks for himself. But there is a lot of wounding around that. I think if you look at the time, like people like Scott were not the norm. There wasn't a lot of respect for the more sensitive writing types. There was a lot of pressure around that. So I can see how his belief systems and what was expected of him kind of ended up blurring and was a really painful, vulnerable spot of his life. He also has Uranus in Scorpio right close to his midheaven. Because he's an Aquarius rising, you want to look to Uranus to actually see some more context. So he's meant to live this unconventional path. It's at his midheaven. So he's meant to do things different. He was going to get in the eye of society by being unconventional and kind of rebelling against societal norms. But Scorpio is a trickier 10th house because it's A lot more vulnerability. Scorpio doesn't like to always be exposed when it's at the top of the chart. It's kind of a interesting anomaly of an energy. Saturn is also there, so I think he had a lot of pressure on him by society that he didn't know how to cope with very well. Usually with 10th house Saturns too, it takes a while to figure out what to do for yourself. There can be pressures and expectations of society put on you, but I think he struggled without the motivation of Zelda to figure out what he wanted to fully do for work. It took her pushing to often get him going. And that also happens with really strong Libras. They can get so indecisive that without a soundboard and without someone to encourage it, the self-motivation can get a lot trickier to grasp. So that's just a few of my musings on Scott Fitzgerald. Let's go into Zelda. So Zelda is a Leo rising, a Leo sun, and a Cancer moon. Leo belongs to the sun and Cancer belongs to the moon. So really, really strong luminary energy in Zelda's chart. What I love is Leo risings are meant to shine. They're meant to be the star, and she was coined the original flapper, which it just shows she's meant to be an icon. And not only when you meet her do you meet Leo rising, which already gives a strong emphasis, but she has the sun right there on the ascendant, which is just giving superstar energy. It gives a vibrance that you can feel. She knows how to get a whole room to turn and look at her, and that's what she was really known for at parties, was being this big energy, this big light, and just shining as a star. It also shows like Leo energy in its highest expression is so creative, but it also keeps a playfulness at heart. And she felt a strong sense to really let her identity be a part of the show, to be the center, a kind of icon. And the one thing with the first house that I think can get a little problematic in its shadow is there's just a lot of sense of self that shines up, but people don't often see the other layers of you. So especially when you have the sun, I have Jupiter on the ascendant, people perceive you really positively and big, but there's obviously a lot more than just that to your chart and to your sense of self. And so sometimes it can be a little mask that can hide what is more underworkings. She also has a Mercury Leo in the first house. So any planet in the first house is going to be really what the world perceives you as, what your first initial instinct is. So even Mercury in the first house makes you really chatty. Your words, what you like to say, is also what gets really noted by other people. And Zelda was known for what she voiced and what she said. It's speaking differently than a lot of people had witnessed. She is known for her words. She's known for her iconic lines, her writing, her communication, even her letters being very famous is very on brand with that Mercury Leo first house. So I love how that presents. If you look at the chart in Placidus, even versus whole sign, her sun is right there on the ascendant line, but it can even land in the 12th house, which means like it was right there on that 12th first house cusp. And a lot of suns in the first house end up going into different mental institutions. She spent a lot of her life in mental health crises, and a lot of times it gets really tricky in that 12th house because there is this confusion around your sense of self, and it can make things get really dark really easily. The 12th house hides something away from you that other people can see that you can't see in yourself. And I think even looking at it through a Placidus lens, where it lands in that 12th house makes a lot of sense. She has other 12th house energy, regardless of if you use whole sign system or Placidus. She also has her moon and Venus in that 12th house. It's really tricky having a 12th house moon because your moods and emotions are often hidden from you. Cancer moons already feel things so big. So when that energy is hidden in your subconscious, it gets really hard to process your emotions, which can essentially drive you a little mad. I also have a 12th house moon and understand that it is extremely hard for me to know what I am feeling. And I don't even have a water moon, and water moons even feel deeper. So I can see that being a really big struggle for her. Often with 12th house moons, you're very highly sensitive. So if you don't get some time and solitude and time to yourself, you can get even more confused on where you start and other people begin because you're blending a lot of energies of other people. 12th house moons are known for being extremely psychic. You can really understand everybody in a way that they usually can't even grasp themselves. You can feel the undercurrents and inner workings. You also are a really, really big channel. And because she has Venus there too, it means a lot of her work, a lot of her artistic expression comes from that intuitive downloads that she received. Another thing along with that moon in Cancer and Venus in Cancer, both in the 12th house, is that you can often feel a lot of pain around some themes of family. I know Zelda felt very rejected by her family. As someone with a 12th house moon as well, oftentimes in your household growing up, you could feel a lot of the undertones that were not being said, and usually no one really gave their full emotional truth. So there can be even a lot of pain felt in early childhood that ends up manifesting a lot. It's usually a lot of issues around your mom as well, more of the motherly line or the feminine line in the family, and that reigns true from what we know about some of her upbringing as well. I think what's really cool is that she has positive aspects between the moon and her midheaven, and some of her best work was done in isolation for her career. And the 12th house is the house of isolation. So as she spent more alone time, she was able to actually do a lot more of what felt more aligned for her writing. And she has some squares between her midheaven and her sun. So when she was in that Leo flapper, shining bright era that a lot of people know her for, she also had conflictions in doing what she was supposed to do because she wasn't given that solitude and space to actually hear her own intuitive channel. Then basically the rest of her chart goes into this crazy dance between Gemini and Sagittarius. She has a stellium in both, and Gemini and Sag are known for their intellect. They're known for their communication. They're known for being fun and sociable. So it so expresses out that she has that strong pull between the sister sign energy. And there's a lot to come through within all of that Gemini and Sag. A few things that really came to mind is we are dealing with the pull between the 5th and the 11th house in that Gemini Sag. So her Sagittarius lands in the 5th and her Gemini all lands in the 11th. And the 5th house is the house of creative freedom. It's the house of children, the house of inner play. It's also the house of hobbies and passions and romance. And some of the shadows of the 5th house can exist more in just overly pleasure seeking and maybe getting a little more escapism-y. And then the 11th house is a lot of themes of what you do for humanity, what you do for the future, your bigger hopes, your bigger dreams, your close friendships, your social circles. So it holds a lot of that Aquarian energy. And for Zelda, her south node actually lands in the 11th house, and her north node is in the 5th. So she is meant to land more 5th house than 11th house. And you can see a lot of that opposition conflict between those two things in her life. Few themes I see in the 11th house. She has Neptune there, Mars there, and Pluto, which are rough planets to kind of all be pressed together too. So there was a lot of power and control lessons and themes that circled around her hopes, her dreams, the themes around societal pressures. So a lot of the constructs of her time is ending up what took a lot from her. There wasn't a lot of room for mental health. That put a lot of pressure on her. There was really poor boundaries in the social circles she was in. So she was around a lot of partying, a lot of escapism. They were very lavish in the way they spent money, and they drank a lot together, her and Scott. And so there was a lot of blur on what is okay, what's not okay. You can feel that like hopeless, dreamy side of her where she's always looking at visions of where she wants things to be, and she can get a little lost in that. Neptune's always where we have hazier boundaries, and with that being in the South Node, if she gets too lost in La La Land and other people, she goes more into things she's not meant to push towards in this life, and she's meant to push more towards that Sagittarian. So a little less gossipy and chatty and a little bit more higher wisdom, higher focus, experiential learning versus learning by the books, learning by even other people. She's meant to learn by doing. I think she did end up pulling some of her higher lessons from that. Look at her North Node. It's close to Chiron. Saturn and Uranus and Jupiter are also close by. So lots of things around her North Node, but it shows she's meant to be rebellious. She's meant to do things different. Uranus is your sense of individuality matters for your soul purpose when it's close to the North Node. The trouble with a Chiron by the North Node is you're meant to be a part of a soul path that leans into some pain and discomfort. She's meant to channel some pain into her creative arts, the work that she does. And I think without owning that pain and really defining that pain, it was hard for her to do that. So once she started to get more help on mental health, some of her better works were actually able to be put out. And I think it's tricky. It's hard to lean into a life of pain versus escapism and, riding other people's waves. And I think she got caught up in that some of the time, but then had to keep finding her way back to what made her feel better and more aligned. She also did ballet as a portion of her life that caused even some physical discomfort in her body. But I think for her, just finding different creative outlets was so important. And she definitely had to learn some of the limits behind this. Wherever you have Saturn, there's going to be hard lessons that you need to learn around that area. So some of her hobbies, the things that were fun to her, she also needed to learn some restrictions around those. And I think the more she felt some of that pain and learned to define some of her mental health stuff, the better that energy started to alchemize. But there is a constant tension and push-pull with all those oppositions. I find her chart to be absolutely so fascinating. I could say so much more, but there is just a little taste. And now let's look at their charts together. So I think it is often a question like, were Zelda and Scott good for each other? I think that is constantly pondered upon because in a way, they understood each other. They had similar ambitions towards the same endeavors. They were both very creative people, and you can see in their writings there was this really passionate love, but there was definitely some toxicity. So I can see in the chart that some of the energies are at least giving that understanding, and I think they really motivated each other in a competitive way. I can also see some of the problem areas in the synastry chart. A few things that my eye is drawn to is we have this Mars and Mars, which definitely creates that competitive edge. They both pushed each other, but you can also get really ego-centered with Mars and Mars. So they were kind of like butting heads, but using that as fuel to drive their ambitions. But that can get a little toxic in a way too. I also find that the South Node, this is Zelda's kind of karmic stuff that she's meant to pull away from gets a little tricky when his Pluto is very close to it. So there seems to be some karmic patterns between them that might be harder to break free of. So we have Scott's sun square Zelda's moon. This is one of the problem areas that I see because I think there could have been some misunderstanding around the emotional needs of Zelda. It's a Cancer moon. It was already kind of hard for her to get a grip on it, but he doesn't help bring some of that emotional clarity up. So that can definitely lead to a bit of a misperception. We also have Sun square Saturn, which I also can see some deeper conflictions with. It can be harder to move past some of the lessons that you're karmically meant to move past in that square. It can add definitely a harshness to things. So Zelda's sun in Leo can not quite get to manifest in its fullest because of Scott's Saturn that exists and holds some tension over it. I think that also kind of played out in their relationship dynamic. There's also another square between Scott's moon and Zelda's sun, which also means that she can misunderstand his emotions. His emotions can also feel ignored. And I think both of them struggling to actually output their emotional truths is what led to some of their deeper struggles. Like Scott fell into becoming a deeper alcoholic, and a lot of times we escape by using substances because we can't get a grip on our emotional world. Zelda ended up struggling more with mental health stuff because it was hard to channel probably a lot of her emotions in the healthier way. And I think for both of them it was tricky. It was hard to actually see the full emotional depths of each other. I also think at this time, like, they were doing the best they could because a lot of people didn't even know about mental health and emotions at this time. So I think it was both a societal struggle and a personal struggle within the relationship dynamics. This is just a few of the things that I see within the chart synastry. Thank you for joining me in this deep dive of Scott and Zelda, the journey of both of their charts through the lens of astrology. And I want to give a little shout out to myself and the app, The Pattern. That is my favorite astrology app. Not even a sponsorship here, but Zelda and I's charts together are a soulmate bond. I understand the inner workings of Zelda's mind, and I feel very honored to have her listed as my soulmate. Thank you guys for joining me in another astrology video. Thank you for supporting my channel. And if you ever want a personal reading, check out sensefulwellness.com, where I offer multiple types of readings, and I will see you in the next video.